All right, we are here with Derek Mulhern. He is an executive life and leadership coach, and he owns Derek Mulhern Coaching Consulting, and that supports leaders at all levels in creating lives and careers that fulfill them. His business is driven by ensuring leaders find their own sense of belonging as a way to grow their leadership and organization. Derek, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. I appreciate it.
Of course. I swear we're going to bring around what Derek does to health and fitness in a way in a second here. Personally, Derek is currently working with my team on leadership and personal development, and it's been awesome. So really appreciate you coming on, Derek.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I can already see all the connections from my angle of how these things help people's well-being as well as their health.
So, with what we do, we always love to help people stay active and stay exercising. So I always like to ask, if you could only do one form of exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So I don't do it as much as I used to, but it would definitely be running. I've done a few half marathons I have on my to-do list. It was supposed to be before I was 30 to do a marathon, but it would definitely be running because I feel like it probably keeps me the most agile in the most ways possible.
It's also the easiest. You don't have to like go anywhere. You just put your shoes on, you just go outside. It's great.
Maybe not as much here in Washington, D.C. during the summer on these humid days, but beyond that, yes.
That's fair. In our pre-interview talk, you were mentioning you might say push-ups, and I was going to call you crazy for saying you do push-ups for the rest of your life, but I think running's a good choice.
Yeah, I adapted. I knew that was not the best choice I've ever made.
All right, so with everything that you do, helping people with leadership, personal development, who's the type of person you like to help the most?
Yeah, so I really work with what I like to say is high achievers. A lot of people that are the type of people that have a pretty clear vision of what they want in their life and are really motivated to get there. They have a lot of the same similar types of challenges that they face in their leadership that all comes back to well-being.
Yeah, and that's where we're going to kind of pull everything you do into what we do, and it's been really interesting. So I think now you've been working with our team for about 2 months, and for the entire first 2 months, really just been working on personal well-being and kind of understanding yourself. So that's where we're going to talk about how is what you're doing helping people take care of themselves. So the first question is, because that can mean a lot of different things, what does taking care of yourself mean to people?
Yeah, I think it can mean so many things. And I think the challenge that we have in all of it is so many people relate to the basic things that they've always known as the ways to take care of themselves. And what I like to say is often are only kicking two of the four tires on the car. So what I look at is myriad of ways that we take care of ourselves. And that's what I like to say is beyond fitness, beyond eating well, because I think that's where a lot of people focus their time at first. But really, to me, taking care of yourself is mentally taking care of yourself, emotionally taking care of yourself, and physically taking care of yourself. And so all three of those combined really create somebody that has the capacity to work and move through life in a way that is powerful and has a lot of meaning and purpose in what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because we find a lot of people have physical injuries and they really just want to optimize their body, but it might be another area of their life that is their physical actually might be really optimized, but their emotional well-being, their mental well-being might actually be what's holding them back. We have a lot of people who they're grinding it out in the gym, they're taking care of their bodies, they're eating well, but they keep getting injured and they can't figure out why. And that's where I think it's important to kind of take a step back and help people understand that mental and emotional well-being side of things that can really propel their physical side forward.
Yeah, and I think that it's the interesting thing that I kind of experience in all of this is I'll even have clients that come to me and I'm going to relate this in a very different way, right? So you may have a client that comes to you and says something to the fact of, I want X fixed. And they're just so laser focused on having that one like piece of their body or their life more complete and kind of showing up the way that they want it to. I have people doing that in very different ways. It's not about their physical health. It's about like, hey, I want to be able to have more clarity in this piece around my career. And I'm just super focused on that. And what they forget in all of that is, well, if you're not getting good sleep, if you're not actually taking care of your body, if you're not actually creating space for you to be aware of what's happening in your life and actually aware of in your body, you're not actually able to get some of those questions answered.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, how do you, if someone comes to you and they're hyper focused on this one problem that they have, how do you get them to take a step back and say, let's figure out what taking care of yourself means?
Yeah. So for me, there's a business development side of this, but it's all comes kind of in what I call enrollment and really helping somebody to see the full picture. So from basically discovery session, if I'm working with a potential new client, what I'll do is really just ask them a lot of questions about how they expect a coaching experience with me to impact their entire life. And they'll ask questions like, I'm here to like become a better leader. I'm here to like have more clarity in where my career is going. And what I really have to bring in is a lot of reinforcement around the fact that as much as we want balance, as much as we want our life to be work and then play and then family and then friends, it all works together. And if we don't have like one of the three legs of the stools, like we can't sit still. So it's really helping people and bringing them along in this holistic space. And I'll be really transparent. Like a lot of people are super uncomfortable in that space. They don't want to have to lean into other areas because what it's going to require is for them to slow down. And so where my focus really is in the first 1 to 2 months with working with people is getting them to understand how to be with themselves, getting them to understand what it means to be aware of who they are, how they show up, and take time to just reflect, like generally just reflect on who you are, how you're showing up, what that means for your life.
Yeah, I think that's really hard. I think not many people take that time to sit back and reflect. And then also, even if they do, they don't have that mirror of someone like you as the coach to help them kind of shape that reflection or even give them a direction of how to reflect. So I think that's a hard thing, especially for high achievers, to slow down to actually move forward. So do you have any recent success stories of someone who might have been hesitant, or maybe someone who was hyper focused on a goal and you helped them kind of reframe their sense of like what they wanted to work on and like how that process worked and like what success did they have?
Yeah, I think there's one individual that comes to mind that had come to me and she was basically like, "Hey, I know that I need a new job. This is just not the space I want to be in anymore. And I don't really build myself as a career coach. For me in a space like this is more like exploration and like how do we understand what we want?" But really had a lot of questions about like what that process looked like. We did a lot of work up front to like for her to really understand herself. And the magical thing, as much as I don't think she would say it at the time, the magical thing was about 4 months into working together, she got laid off. And instead of what I've seen numerous people do is panic and go try and find any job that will hire them, she paused. She went on a 4 week trip to Australia, really just took care of herself, had like a very clear mind about like this is going to work out, and came back with a lot of intention on how she wanted to approach her job search. And she had something within 6 weeks after that. And there's luck and there are other things that go along with this, like there's skill. But what I recognize is oftentimes people are trying to fix something. And when they try and fix something, they only create a temporary way to assess it or to come to a solution. When people are more opting into the experience of whatever the next thing is, not as a fix, but as a holistic approach, they're really just having a lot more opportunity to see how things can fit into their life rather than one thing must be the thing that makes my life good, makes my life positive. And so it was just really cool to be able to see her have enough self-awareness of herself to know that if she rushed, she would create the same situation she was in before.
That's great. So it sounds like to me, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're almost broadening what people view as successful or healthy or things like that, and just giving them a lot more options instead of this is the only way that I can be happy. Is that true?
Totally. And I think that there's just this piece around it. So, yeah, it's redefining what health looks like. And I think one of the things that I say sometimes to people is I'll start off our container of working together by really highlighting that there are three things that I really want people to focus on. It is reflection and spending time with themselves, it's well being, and really trying to find ways to take care of themselves, and it's intention, like really having intention around their integrity of what they want to do. And so to me, those are all healthy practices. Like we can sit here and talk about being healthy by going to the gym and eating well, but are you really looking at your financial acumen and your savings to ensure that not you're doing it right, but that you are like in integrity with the things that you actually want to do? So those things all just combine together to be able to have access to a lot of the other things that people want. Because at the end of the day, my experience at least is that a lot of people going to the gym may have an actual goal, but there's actually something they really want. deeper out of that, that is needing a lot of other pieces of their life to work together for it to happen.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds very similar to kind of how we approach things sometimes. I remember one person who he was telling me he was getting injured every year. He was getting really frustrated with his body. He really wanted to optimize his body. He wanted to optimize his workout routine, and he was doing all this work to improve it. And then I kind of asked some questions, and it turned out he was a college professor. He was getting injured at the same time every single year. And it was always around finals time. So he was trying to optimize this one area of his life when probably it was more the mental stress. And if he just put a little bit more work into the mental side, he wouldn't have had that breakdown. So it sounds very similar to kind of that approach.
Totally. I mean, what I'm hearing in what you just said is patterns, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to help people see the patterns that they have in their life because that's going to help them be more aware for themselves of what it is that they want to do differently.
Yep.
And one of the things I work with some clients on at times is, and you guys have experienced some of this in the work that we've done, is we talk about like who are you being versus what are you doing? And while doing things can be great, sometimes it's more how you're showing up around the thing. So what I like to do with some clients is I call it creating a back to being list. What are the things that you can do that will bring you back to like being centered with yourself? So the decisions you make and the clarity you have is really there and present. And so sometimes that is like, I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go do some of my physical exercise. Sometimes it's that I'm going to get sleep. Sometimes that's just that I'm going to go spend some time with myself. But those things all create to me healthy habits for us to be able to make healthy decisions for our life.
Yeah, that actually fits perfectly into my next question is I think a lot of people know what healthy habits look like or they know what it takes to maintain a healthy lifestyle, but they often have a hard time putting it into action. What do you find are some of the main things that hold people back from taking care of themselves when they might intellectually know I should be doing this or I need to be doing that?
Yeah. Let me ask you just a quick question too. I just want to hear your responses. What do you hear when you hear the word accountability?
When I hear the word accountability, it's a, some sort of system or some sort of way to check are you making decisions that you want to be making?
Yeah. And so I asked you that question, Jesse, just because everyone has will have a very, not very different. Some may have the
Yep.
same answer as you, but some will have very different ones. And I've also heard people say things to the fact of like, oh, one of like, when I think of accountability, I think of like either I'm getting stuff done or I'm not getting stuff done. Okay, cool. So we're looking at a black and white answer here, and there's either good or bad. And so when people are looking at creating healthy habits, one of the things I see so often, and it's different for everyone, right? But it is really getting under like, what is it that's keeping you from creating this habit? Because more times than not, what I will uncover with people is, oh, you believe that accountability is a bad thing. It has been used for you in the past of like, you must do this. And if you don't, there's a punishment. It might be something to the fact of like, I'm afraid to actually step into this because if I do it, I won't actually succeed. And so as much as we can like create structures, what I have started to learn more is like if I can dig up the dirt a little bit with the person and say like, hey, what's actually down here? What's actually keeping you from getting X, Y, or Z accomplished or into a habit? That's where we kind of get into this sweet spot because when people can see that they've created these mental barriers and blocks for themselves, that's where then they can start to create new stories and new patterns in their life. That doesn't mean it's going to flip the switch like a new day, but somebody might also realize that like for them, a habit looks very different than reading the book about atomic habits, right? Like it may not be the actual way that someone says to do it for them. They may just operate in a very different way and they get a lot more empowered by seeing that the way they operate is an okay way to operate versus trying to do it like everyone else does it.
Yeah, I think that's great. So just giving people more options of ways that they can, if they want to do X, they don't necessarily have to do Y. They can do M or B. But understanding that X sounds important. Sounds like that's the first thing you do with people is like, what do you actually want to get out of this? Before you do anything else, figure that out first.
Oh, totally. And I think that's the thing is like people will say, I want X, Y, or Z. And I can imagine a number of people probably coming into your clinic saying that they want to be able to run faster. They want to be able to lift more, but like, what the hell for? And not that we don't want to help them achieve their goals, but what we start to really learn is that they've made these stories about why they can't do that. And it's not that some of the reasons that they're showing up aren't real reasons that like you can do some of the great work with them. And there's also a piece of it that's also like, hey, what if you just viewed this differently? What if you showed up around it differently? What if you saw that there's a different way to go about it? So I just think that there's so many ways for people to assess these things that can support them in how they move forward.
Yeah, and so that touches on. So you briefly mentioned habits, kind of mentioned behavior change a little bit. And what we find is that often physical pain is related to stress, it's related to lack of sleep, and some of the emotional, mental well being stuff we talked about. And I think a lot of times when we have that conversation, people are like, oh, yeah, I definitely know that, but I can't change that. Right. So they know that this circumstance is affecting them negatively, but they don't think that they have the power to change that. So, what's one thing people can do, or maybe two things people can do to like start to make some changes that they want to make, but they can't seem to make traction with?
I think the first thing is to really ask yourself, if I were to do it, what would it look like? Actually just start envisioning it and being really clear about if you're just saying no, that's never worked for me before. Cool, we're done. There's nothing more to do. So if you actually take the step to actually like envision what it would be like for you to do it, there's a lot more likelihood for you to actually try and to implement those things. The other things is like even talking about goals. Some of this is super corny, Jesse, but there are so many statistics out there that if you post a goal or tell someone about a goal that you have, you go from like 30% likelihood of achieving it to like 65 plus percent. And the more people you tell, you get to like 80 and 90%. And I've even experienced that in building my own business, right? When I'm in a group of people and I'm telling them the things I want to do, it's not even that I'm more driven to do it. It's just more integrated into what my life is. And my assumption often is the people that are coming and saying, yeah, but that doesn't work. That's where the conversation ends. They're not actually getting the support system they might need to be able to move forward in it. Actually envisioning it, creating goals, and actually having the support system to have the right people around.
Yeah, I think that support system is huge, and it can be your family, it can be your friends, it can be a colleague, it can be a coach like yourself, it can be your physical therapist. But I think that support system is so powerful. I love everything you just said. The only other thing I just read, which was interesting, is I think people are like four times more likely to achieve a goal or even start doing something if they say when they're going to do it. If they just say, I'm going to get more sleep, they're X amount likely. If they're going to say, I'm going to get more sleep on Tuesday, then they're like four times more likely. Or if they want to make nutrition choices, they're going to say, the next time I open my cupboard, I'm not going to grab the chips, right? So if they give a very specific time and place, they're way more likely to actually achieve or even start to make progress.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I'm thinking back to my coaches training program. There's a couple of things that like when we did so much practice coaching with each other, you'd get to this point where people would just laugh at each other when you'd ask a certain question. And some of those questions were like somebody would say, oh, this is the thing I'm going to do. So they're establishing their practice. And this is like one of our competencies is around like helping someone learn and facilitating their growth. And so as soon as somebody says that, you get really clear on what it is. And then you ask them, by when will you do it? And like that's just a common phrase, but it's actually getting them to speak it and to say it and to like actually own that. And then also having them understand what's the impact that you see that actually having on the things you want to achieve. So cool. I'm going to eat healthier. Okay, so when you've decided to eat healthier and you're going to eat not Honey Nut Cheerios, but just Cheerios by starting next Friday, what is the actual impact that you see that having on your life and getting people really aware of actually what they're trying to achieve because it's not about the Cheerios, it's about the thing on the other side. And then the other thing is just like when somebody comes with like good news that they did something, my response is always like, how are you going to celebrate that? Because we just don't bring celebration or reward systems into things we do very often. And so we don't actually see ourselves winning and we're not aware of the winning that we're doing. We're just aware that we actually want to go further and do more. And therefore, we never took a moment to stop and actually celebrate the progress that we have made.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so guilty of that. That's something I've worked on a lot this year is just celebrating things a little bit more because I'm someone that always wants to do more and always wants to achieve more, but it's just a grind because there's always more to do. And I also find that like when I celebrate small things, it gives me motivation to, okay, now let's do the next small thing. And that small thing adds up to the next thing. So I used to think if I celebrated things too much, I would get complacent, but it actually like creates more motivation for me to celebrate those things.
Totally. Yep. I'm on the same page, Jesse. I love to run right over any type of celebration or reward because I've got stuff to get done. But when you actually do it, you're actually a lot more like, oh, look at what I've done. Like when I actually look back from when I've started my business to now, I'm kind of like, wow, you did some pretty cool things. But if you don't stop and reflect on that, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. So one thing we like to do is help people give less things to think about. There's so much information in healthcare that it often becomes overwhelming. So we try to actually tell people, hey, here's something you actually don't need to think about. And sometimes that's more helpful than giving them more information. So what's a health trend or a mental health trend or a mental health idea that you think is really overrated and talked about too much?
Jesse, when I read this question in prep, I was like, this is an interesting one. I wonder what I would say to this. I'm going to give an initial answer and see if anything kind of comes up as I say it. I think my answer would be like finding a solution. It's like the worst thing probably ever from some healthcare providers of wanting to hear. But I think so often people are going into any healthcare situation or going into any health situation and assuming that there is a silver bullet and assuming that like one thing can fix it. And the reality is like it can't. And the other piece of it is like the harder you latch onto that and the harder you look for it, the more challenging it's going to be for you to actually allow yourself to see the things that are helping in health, are improving your well-being, your mental health. And so when you are just out there looking for the one solution, good luck. Like it is going to be really hard for you. And I'm trying to think of like an actual specific story or kind of example to roll into that. I think this might not be the most related to no, actually, yes. I think we can use a healthcare, like a more health one. I think somebody saying, I'm going to run a marathon because I want to lose a bunch of weight. You might lose some weight, but A, is it actually going to be sustaining? And B, it's not just about running that's going to keep you from, like, that's going to have you lose weight. There's a lot of other contributing factors here. And actually, why do you want to lose weight? You probably have a different reason you want to lose weight. It might actually be to like help your cholesterol. It might be because you're just unhappy with how you look. And all these things actually have different outcomes than just like running a marathon and finishing it and losing a little bit of weight. So maybe not the perfect example, but kind of there's not a specific fix to any specific problem.
No, I love that message because it's mental health is complicated, professional development is complicated, physical health is complicated, and our brains are just wired to want a really simple solution to things. It's hard to take multiple things and integrate it. So we always want the easiest solution. So I think that's a great message.
And I even think with today's society, like we want it right now, right?
Yeah.
We want everything. We want it to be in our hands and taking a step back to recognize that it's happening, but it's just going to happen at its own pace. There's a whole spiritual message in here too, if you want to hear
Yeah.
it. But I think that it's owning that these things are going to take time.
I love that. This has been great. So what message would you want to leave people with, or what's one piece of health advice you wish everyone knew?
Yeah, I think the message that I would leave people with is, this is a little bit of a plug for myself also, but like as we kind of looked at the beginning of how you kind of introduced me, I work a lot with organizations and teams, and people don't understand how these things work together because this is how we spend a lot of time actually developing and evolving teams. It's not just about the health piece, but it's about the mental acuity and awareness to be able to be engaged in yourself and aware of yourself. And so what I think that if there's any message I would want people to walk away with, it's that any investment in yourself and in your own development and in your own capacity to reflect is going to pay off dividends. And so if you do nothing else from listening to this, besides saying, I'm going to be more aware of my actions, or I'm going to pick up a journal and journal 3 times a week, those are actually super cool things that can have a big impact on your life. And so that a level of awareness and that level of reflection is, I think, a great place for people to start to be able to say, okay, now what? Like, what am I learning about myself as I'm aware of this? And honestly, you can listen to tons and tons of podcasts to probably pick up on some of this, but there's a lot of different resources out there to be able to support yourself.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Derek, thanks so much for your time. How can people find you or learn more about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Derek Mulhern. Otherwise, you can go to derekmulhern.com, DerekMulhern.com, and either follow my contact page or just add me on LinkedIn. But those are the 2 ways that I'm really getting in touch with people. And would love to chat, whether it's about organizational stuff, personal stuff, whatever it might be. Would love to be able to see if there's ways to support.
That's great. Derek, thanks so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse.